Have you ever looked into a dog's eyes and felt, deep down, that they knew something you didn't? Something you couldn't explain or prove, but just felt in your bones? That's how it all began. One ordinary morning in November, something in Daisy's gaze changed. My golden retriever, always happy, always bouncing, suddenly stopped mid-tail wag and stared at me as if I were a stranger. That stare didn't last a second or two. It lingered. It dug into me like she was trying to say something, but couldn't. That moment stuck with me. It should have been just another Thursday. Coffee brewing, toast popping, birds outside squabbling like they always did. But instead, I felt watched. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of mournful worry I couldn't understand. I'd just turned 38. I was healthy, or so I thought. No symptoms, no reason to panic. But that morning, Daisy sniffed at my side obsessively. Not just a curious sniff, more like desperation, like she was searching for something beneath my skin. She whined, nudged me. Her nose kept going to the same spot, just beneath my ribcage, right side. I laughed at first. "What is it, girl? Did I spill something there?" But she didn't back off. That night, she refused to sleep at the foot of the bed. Instead, she curled up against my side, head resting exactly where she'd sniffed that morning. I told myself she was just being clingy, but it didn't stop the next day, or the day after. And then she started barking when I got dressed for work, blocking the door, refusing to let me leave unless I patted that same spot. It was absurd. But Daisy wasn't acting like herself. She wasn't eating properly either. She'd always been a voracious eater, practically inhaling kibble. But now she'd stare at her food, then back at me, whimpering. I started losing sleep. Not because of fear, yet, but because something primal inside me whispered that this wasn't normal, that my dog knew something I didn't. And then came the incident at the park. It was a crisp Sunday morning, and I'd taken Daisy to our usual trail. Families strolled, leaves crunched, and life was, to the outside eye, perfectly normal. But halfway through our walk, Daisy froze, hackles raised, not at a squirrel or another dog, but at me. She lunged lightly, pulling the leash taut, and began circling me in frantic loops. I stopped. "What's wrong with you today?" I asked, embarrassed. And then she did something she'd never done. She jumped up and pawed at my side, hard enough to leave a bruise. I cried out, startled. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. There was no bruise, no bump, nothing. Still, I found myself booking a doctor's appointment the next day. Not because I felt unwell, but because Daisy wouldn't let me forget. She paced, she whined. She slept with her head on my side every night. My friends laughed when I told them. "Maybe she's being overprotective," one said. "Or just anxious," another offered. But their laughter faded the moment I told them what the doctor said. He'd done a routine check, found nothing unusual, until I casually mentioned that my dog kept sniffing a spot on my side. He chuckled, but humored me, ordered an ultrasound just to be thorough. He almost didn't, and if he hadn't, I wouldn't be here today. The ultrasound revealed a mass, small, hidden, deep in the liver. No symptoms, no pain, nothing that would have raised suspicion, but it was there. The room fell silent. The technician's face turned from casual to serious. She excused herself. When the doctor returned, his smile was gone. "We'll need to do more tests," he said. "It's probably nothing, but we should be safe." I didn't hear anything after that. All I could think about was Daisy, her eyes, her warnings, her refusal to let it go. A week later, I was diagnosed with hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, early stage, but aggressive, The doctor said, "You're lucky we caught it when we did." But I wasn't lucky. I was loved, fiercely, silently, intuitively, by a creature who couldn't speak but knew before anyone else. What followed was a blur of scans, consultations, sleepless nights, and moments where everything inside me screamed that I wasn't ready to die. I hadn't lived enough. I hadn't said everything I needed to say. I hadn't traveled, hadn't told my estranged father I forgave him, hadn't even updated my will. I was too young for this. Too healthy, they'd all said. But Daisy had known. She stayed beside me through every stage. When I wept after the first biopsy, she curled into my lap, licked away tears like it was her mission. When I collapsed from chemo nausea, she fetched my water bottle, something I never taught her. And when I wanted to give up, when the pain outmatched the hope, she would nudge me, bark once, and drag me to the door, forcing me to walk, to breathe, to live. My oncologist was amazed at the early detection. "This saved your life," she said, tapping the chart. "This and your dog." I began to research. Could animals really detect cancer? Science said yes. Dogs have up to 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to about 6 million in humans. Some could detect cancer by scent alone, even at early stages. Studies confirmed it. But none of that explained how Daisy knew. She didn't just sniff it out. She felt it, like an alarm going off inside her, loud and urgent. And she never stopped warning me. Not until the surgery was done, not until the last round of chemo, not until my scans came back clean. That night, after my final appointment, I came home and found Daisy asleep on the couch, belly up, snoring peacefully, for the first time in months, as if her job was done. She'd saved me, literally. But the story doesn't end there. Months later, something even more extraordinary happened. I'd begun volunteering at the cancer ward, sharing my story with patients. Some asked if they could meet Daisy, so I brought her in, just once. Something about her presence lit up the room. She'd rest her head on laps, sniff gently, and wag her tail. But then she stopped in front of a little girl, Emma, age 9. Daisy stiffened. That look returned, that stare, just like she'd given me. She leaned in, pressed her nose to Emma's chest, then whined. I froze. I told the nurse, quietly. They dismissed it as coincidence. Emma was being treated for leukemia, and scans had shown improvement. But a week later, Emma collapsed, rushed to the ICU. A new tumor had developed, missed on the previous scan. Aggressive, fast-growing, but caught just in time. I sat outside her room, clutching Daisy, trembling. Doctors didn't understand how it grew so fast, but I did. Or rather, Daisy did. Word spread. A local paper ran the headline, "Hero dog sniffs out cancer, twice." Calls flooded in. People asked if Daisy could check their loved ones. It was overwhelming. But I knew Daisy wasn't a machine. She was a miracle, one that had chosen me. I turned down offers for media appearances, for lab testing, for canine clinical trials. I just wanted her to live out her days in peace. But she had other plans. She started tugging at her leash during walks again, leading me down unfamiliar streets. One day, she dragged me to an old man sitting alone on a bench. She sniffed him, then looked back at me with that familiar urgency. I didn't know what to do. I hesitated. But finally, I approached. "Hi. I know this sounds strange, but my dog thinks you might need to see a doctor." He blinked, laughed, then paused. "Funny you say that. I've had this ache here." He pointed. "I've been ignoring it. Didn't want to make a fuss." Weeks later, I got a letter. They found a mass, early stage, You saved my life. No, I didn't. Daisy did. Years passed. I recovered. But Daisy began to slow down. Grey touched her muzzle. Her walks shortened, but her eyes stayed sharp, watchful, protective. She lived long enough to see me turn 42, long enough to see me publish a book about her, long enough to be by my side the day I gave birth to my son. She sniffed him once, then licked his head. Approved. Then, one morning, she didn't get up. She lay beside me, head on my lap, eyes soft. She looked tired, but peaceful, like she'd finally finished her mission. I held her close as the vet administered the injection, whispered 1,000 thank yous through my tears. Her heart stopped, but mine kept beating because of her. People ask if I believe in miracles. I tell them I live because of one. People ask if dogs can smell cancer. I say yes, and maybe even more. Maybe they feel what we bury. Maybe they hear what we silence. Maybe they see our souls clearer than any mirror. Daisy was just a dog, but she saved me in ways I'll never fully understand. Not just from cancer, but from fear, from loneliness, from forgetting what it means to fight. So if your dog ever stares at you a little too long, if they sniff one spot over and over, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off. They might know something you don't. And if they do, maybe, just maybe, they're trying to save your life. I thought the story ended when Daisy took her last breath. I believed the miracle had come full circle, that her gift, her warnings, her inexplicable understanding of life and death had faded with her heartbeat. But I was wrong. What I didn't understand at the time is that love, real love, the kind born out of selflessness and sacrifice, leaves fingerprints on the world long after it's gone. And with Daisy, those fingerprints weren't just metaphorical. They were active, vibrant, echoing. Just 3 weeks after her passing, something happened that shattered everything I thought I knew about life and what might come after. It was late. I was cradling my newborn, James, by the window. He had colic, and nothing soothed him except moonlight and motion. I'd rock him, hum to him, and sometimes cry with him. That night, as I looked out into the dark yard, I saw movement. Not suspicious, not threatening, just familiar. At first, I thought it was my grief playing tricks, but the shape was unmistakable. That gait, that golden blur. I dropped to my knees, heart hammering. "Daisy," I whispered, but there was nothing there. James stopped crying. Cold silence filled the room. The next day, I found an old photo tucked inside the baby blanket drawer. I hadn't put it there. It was of Daisy, her head resting on my belly the day I found out I was pregnant. I stared at the image for a long time, then flipped it over. In faded ink, in my own handwriting, I had once scribbled, "She knows before I do." I'd forgotten I'd even written that. That's when I began to feel it. Something strange, like Daisy's presence hadn't fully left. My mother came to visit a week later. She'd never been spiritual, never believed in signs, but while holding James, she suddenly gasped. "I just smelled her," she whispered. "Daisy," like she brushed past me. I blinked. "What?" She shook her head. "I swear I smelled her fur. You remember how she used to smell like wildflowers in the woods? It was just for a second." A few nights later, it happened again. Not to me, but to my friend Rachel, a single mother battling breast cancer. She'd come to stay with me for a few days while recovering from surgery. We were sitting in the living room, talking quietly, when she paused and looked over her shoulder. "Is Daisy here?" I froze. "She passed," I said gently. Rachel's face went pale. then explain why I just felt something warm press against my chest. She touched her surgical site, blinking away tears. I swear I felt her nudge me, just like she did before. Coincidence, that's what most people would call it. But these coincidences kept stacking. One evening, my baby monitor crackled. Static. Then, something else. A sound. Software rhythmic, like panting. I rushed into James's room. Nothing there. But the scent of Daisy filled the air. I began to wonder if she'd stayed behind, not as a ghost, but as something else. A guardian, a warning, a presence. And then came the dream. In the dream, Daisy sat at the edge of a cliff. Her fur glowed under the twilight, eyes fixed on the horizon. I walked toward her, crying, desperate to touch her again. But she didn't move, just looked at me, and this part I'll never forget. She lifted her paw and pointed. Behind me. I turned. There was a little girl, pale, crying, alone. I didn't recognize her. But when I woke up, I had a name in my head. Lila. Clear as day. It haunted me. 2 days later, while volunteering again at the cancer center, I met a woman named Angela in the waiting room. She was sobbing. Her 5-year-old had just been diagnosed. "Her name's Lila," she said. I froze. My hands trembled. "Lila?" I repeated. "Yes," she whispered. "She hasn't responded to treatment, and She couldn't finish. I excused myself, vomited in the bathroom. The dream, the name, Daisy pointing. It couldn't be random. I went back in, sat beside Angela, and without knowing why, I said, "Try the pediatric trial program at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Michigan. Please. It's rare, but they specialize in cases like hers." Angela blinked. "How do you know that?" I shook my head. "I don't. But please." She did. 3 weeks later, she called me in tears. They accepted her, and they found something the other hospital missed. Lila's responding to treatment. They said another month, and it might have been too late. I dropped the phone and wept. For the girl, for the chance, for Daisy, for the unexplainable truth that somehow, my dog wasn't done saving lives. And that's when it hit me. Daisy hadn't just saved me. She had become something larger, a ripple, a force, a thread stitched into the unseen fabric of people's lives, people I'd never met, stories I hadn't begun to write. The dog who once pawed at my side now moved through memory, time, instinct, and love. She had become legend, not in the fairy tale sense, but in the real way that legends are born, in moments, in whispers, in things that should not be possible, but are. In the months that followed, I kept a journal. I recorded every incident, every dream, every story where someone claimed to feel her. Some were subtle, others shocking. A woman I'd never met messaged me after reading my article in a veterinary magazine. "I have cancer," she said. "Your story made me check again. And you were right. They missed it. I caught it early because of you and Daisy." Another wrote, "I had a dream of a golden retriever nudging my stomach. I thought it was odd. I woke up, felt pain, and went to the ER. They found a ruptured appendix. Each time I lit a candle for Daisy. Each time I whispered, 'Still working, aren't you?'" But the most haunting moment came a year later, on James's first birthday. I had set up balloons, invited a few close friends, and was getting ready when I felt it. A tug on my shirt, like a gentle nip. I turned around. Nothing. But James began laughing. He pointed toward the hall. "Doggy!" he squealed. I froze. He'd never seen another dog. Daisy had passed before he could remember her. "Doggy!" he repeated, clapping. I fell to my knees and sobbed, not because I was scared, but because I believed him. You may say it's wishful thinking, a mind desperate to make sense of loss. But I've learned that just because we can't measure something doesn't mean it's not real. Science can explain how dogs smell cancer, but it can't explain how Daisy knew where it was, how she sensed it in others, how she continues, somehow, some way, to touch lives. So now I tell her story not just as a tribute, but as a warning. Listen, watch, feel. If your pet starts acting strange, don't ignore it. If your dog stares at one part of your body, listen. They may know something doctors don't. They may be trying to save your life, because mine did. And even in death, she never stopped.